Well, thanks everybody for joining us here for another one of our live sessions, our live FYI video sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about immigration for Portuguese in the United States. And one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because the immigration process has changed so drastically over the decades. And I think there's still a lot of unknowns for people on what the process is, what are the options. If you have a friend that's living in Portugal and they just, hey, I want to go live in the United States, what are the options, right? 50 years ago, if you were like my great grandfather, you could sponsor people, give them a place to stay, they could work on your dairy, but that's not necessarily how it works anymore. And so I think this will be educational for people, and we're happy to answer questions. And to give us that information, we have two immigration lawyers. So this is their area of specialty. We have Cynthia Russo from New Jersey and Ana Ferreira from Pennsylvania. And Cynthia used to be on the PALCUS board and was on the board for many years, I think 17 years. And Ana is one of our newest board members. So thank you both for joining us and putting together such informative a presentation. And so I'm going to hand it over to you guys. You just tell me when to click through.
Okay. Thank you, Angela, for the introduction. I guess we'll start with the first slide. Why are there very few legal immigration options now? Basically, before 1924, there was no visa quota. So if you had grandparents, great-grandparents, or relatives that came from Portugal or another European country or wherever they were coming from, they didn't have to wait for any period of time. They would just get on the ship and they would come over. And sometimes a lot of people say today, oh, why can't they come legal, these new people who are staying and they're unlawful? Well, it's become very difficult to come in legal. The only legal way now is through, if you have a relative, an immediate relative, which would be your spouse or your parent, and they're citizens or residents, they can call you, but there is a waiting period. And sometimes you're separated for a certain amount of time, a couple of years before you can actually come over. And there are employment options as well, but the employment options have changed drastically since April of 2001. Before that, like Angela was mentioning, you could sponsor someone, they would come over, they would work for you, and then when the time came, they paid their taxes. If they didn't have any major security issues, then they would be accepted into the United States. But we have not had any immigration change since April of 2001. That's a long time. And now you can still come on an employment visa, but it's difficult because a lot of people that need someone to work, they need them to work now. They don't want to wait 3 to 4 years and then bring the person over. And then when they do come into the United States, if, for example, they're a carpenter or a mason or a painter or a nanny, they legally are not bound to stay with that employer for any amount of time, maybe a couple of weeks, a couple of months. So there's no incentive really for the employer to wait for someone, especially if they need a person immediately. The only options to come in on employment visas immediately are if you are a person of national interest, which is very difficult. I mean, you have to have had invented something, have some patent that the United States feels you're so important and you don't need a sponsor. Or you can come in on a professional visa or management visa under an H-1, which is a company still has to sponsor you, but you could stay here under that specific visa until your time came to finish your process and become permanent. That is a very difficult process. In the past 10 years, there's always been a lottery, and those numbers have been cut down extremely. So it's difficult to, even if you file all your paperwork on time, which it's filed in April of every year, there's this great big lottery, and 30% of the people only will get their visa. So it's really difficult to come in legally and under an employment option. We do have a warning for some Portuguese people that are here, and Portuguese people do not qualify for asylum. They come in under the visa waiver program. They don't have to go get a visa like they did before 1999. They would have to go to the consulate in Porto or in Lisbon. Now, since they are one of the countries that we have an international treaty with Portugal, that we allow them to just sign up online and then they come in and they're allowed 90 days. But if you overstay those 90 days and you leave, you're subject to a 5-year bar of deportation. So it's very difficult. Portugal does not have asylum, and we're just sticking that little warning in there because we do know some people that have gotten desperate in 20 years. And there's a lot of people that give the wrong advice. There's agencies, unauthorized people that are not attorneys that don't know what they're doing. And they promise these Portuguese people a way to get legal, and that's what they want to do. They've been here 20 years. So no asylum for Portuguese people. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the naturalization process. So
next slide.
Next slide. Okay. Naturalization, you can apply for naturalization if you've been a permanent resident for 5 years. And as you can see, according to the list, there's an English language test. If you have a disability where you cannot remember things, or you have some sort of medical disability that would impair your knowledge to remember things, or your ability to remember things, to remember the questions about the history test, then you can file a medical exemption with your application. If you are someone who's very elderly, maybe in a nursing home, there are very rare times where the immigration will go to your nursing home to give you the naturalization test because you can't go there. That has to be done by a specific appointment with your director of the state you live in. You have to be a person of good moral character, of course. That means no crimes that would go to good moral character during the time period, which would be the last 5 years before you apply. You have to have taxes. And if you owe income taxes, you can owe them and still file for naturalization, but you have to be on an IRS payment plan. So that's one thing. They will not give you your citizenship if you're not. You cannot have been outside the United States for a long period of time, because if you're out more than half of the period in the last 5 years, that would be 2.5 years, then you don't qualify for the physical presence part of citizenship. There was a revised civics test in December, but now as of last week, we are back to the old test, which is good because the new test had added 28 questions. So now we're back to the old test. It's 100 questions and we're good. I do have one thing to say about the English language test. If you're Portuguese or any other language and you've had your green card for you've had your green card 20 years and you're over 50, you can get your test in the Portuguese language. If you're over 55 and you had the green card 15 years, you're also eligible. And if you're over 65, you only get, and you've been here 20 years with the green card, you only get 20 questions, and it's really easy. You don't even have to write. The one other exemption, if you are for naturalization, is that if you are married to an American citizen, you would start counting, you can file within 3 years versus the 5 years. You have to still be married to that citizen. You have to have proof of your joint assets, your joint marital life, and you can apply in 3 years. We'll be taking questions at the end, so let us know, write them down and let us know. Okay. We want to talk about the DACA. I'm sure everybody or a lot of people have heard about the Dreamers. you had to have come to the United States and be here June 15, 2012, and you had to have been under 31 on that date. You had to have come to the United States before 16 years old, and you have to have resided in the US since June 15, 2007. That means when you have to prove you've resided since 2007, or when you entered, you have to have your income tax, or you could be on your parents' taxes, or you have to have your academic transcripts. You have to prove for all those years that you stayed in the United States and that you were here June 15, 2012. You have to have been in school, graduated high school, or had a GED, or an honorably discharged veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. And you cannot have been convicted of a felony or a significant misdemeanor or 3 or more misdemeanors. Usually with the young people, it's, you can't have had a DUI or anything involving drugs. There might be a new exception now because pot is legal, marijuana is legal in certain states, but that's not specific yet. And also, you have to remember one thing: immigration is federal law. So under the federal law, the cannabis is still not allowed, not legal. Okay. So now Anna's going to talk to us about SIDG.
Thank you. Angela, you can go to the next slide.
Can you see the special immigrant?
No. There it is.
Okay.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ana Ferreira. I'm an immigration attorney in Philadelphia. So I'm going to talk about 3 other options, which is special immigrant juvenile status. We'll start with that. Special immigrant juvenile status, or SIJ, or SIDG, is an option available to children that were abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. It's a green card application if they can meet this 2-part process. The first part, we have to go to family court to get a predicate order where a family court judge is going to find that the child was abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. For immigration purposes, this has to be done before the child turns 21. But because there's the state family court component, some state courts, once the child turns 18, that's the maximum age that a child can get a custody order. Other states, it's up to 21. Here in Pennsylvania, it's 18 years old, but our neighboring state in New Jersey, it's 21. So as long as the child has a state court order and can also file the immigration part before they reach 21, they qualify for this process. It's a really great way for a child to get legal status here, because even if a child came in through Mexico, they do not have to go back to their country. They do not have to do a waiver. It's a green card application that the child can get while they're here in the United States. The only thing that's negative about this process is the child can never petition for either of their parents. Even the parent that did not abuse or abandon or neglect the child will never be able to apply for that parent to become a citizen or to get a green card here. So this is a benefit that only the child will directly receive. Angela, you can go to the next slide, please.
It's up.
Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is a U visa. A U visa is for victims of qualifying crime. So this means that the person was a victim of a crime here in the United States. It had to have occurred in the United States. It's not every crime. There's a list of about 20 some crimes. These on the slide are the most common crime. The first step to see if you qualify for a victim is whether you were a victim of one of these crimes. The second step is you have to be helpful to the police or law enforcement. So things that you want to ask is, did you call the police? Did you tell them what happened? Did you answer their questions? Did you let them take pictures? If you received a subpoena asking you to go to court, did you go? Did you talk to the prosecutor? If you answer yes to any of those questions, you might qualify for a U visa. It's a 2-step process. The first step, we have to file an application with the police asking them to certify that you were in fact a victim of a crime and you were helpful to the police. So if you did call the police, but then you refuse to answer their questions or to help them, they're not going to sign the application certifying that you were helpful to them. And you cannot apply with immigration. You cannot do the second part without first having that part. And then another thing, the U visa, you have to show that you were injured. It doesn't have to be a physical injury. It could be a mental injury. So, you know, did you become depressed? Are you sad? Are you having trouble sleeping or eating because of what happened to you? So it's something to think about. There is a quota on U visas. They accept 10,000 per year, so it is pretty backlogged, but it could also be an option for somebody that's here without any documents and that has no other path to legalization at the moment. Okay, you can go to the next one. So next we're going to talk about VAWA. VAWA stands for Violence Against Women's Act. This name is a little bit misleading because the V stands for violence. It does not have to be a violent crime. It does not have to be violence that happens to the person. And the W stands for woman. This applies to women and men. So the name is a little bit misleading, but this, you may qualify for VAWA if you are married to a American citizen or a lawful permanent resident, which means somebody that has a green card, and they have been abusing you in some way. It's not just necessarily physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, financial control, that all fits the umbrella of abuse. And it doesn't have to just be a spouse. It could also be a son or daughter, a U.S. citizen son or daughter that's abusing you. This law really exists because the United States, they don't want somebody who is married to an American citizen or who's married to a green card holder that is being controlled by that person because of their legal status. And, you know, that person saying, we'll apply for you, but you have to do this for me. Or, you know, if you do this or do that, I'm not going to apply for you. You're going to be stuck here. You're going to be deported. The abusing spouse or child can exert some sort of control over the immigrant. And we don't want that. We don't want people to be treated like that. So this is a process that you can apply for your green card. You can petition yourself without your spouse or child knowing. It's a very secure, very confidential process. And I think that's, you know, that's something that's really important because a lot of these victims are scared to come forward and think that something bad might happen. But the way that this VAWA was designed is to protect the victim. So the abusing spouse would never know that you are applying for this. They will never get any notification. They will never be asked anything. So I think that's something that's really important, and it's an option that's out there for people that are in this situation.
Okay, so we know that everybody has heard about, this is Cynthia Russo again. We're going to talk a little bit about President Biden's immigration plan, but we need everybody to understand that this plan was introduced last Thursday to the Congress, and it has to pass a lot of different hurdles before it's actually approved. So there's different parts of the plan. We're going to mainly talk about the lawful prospective immigrant. What will it mean if President Biden's plan passes, or at least part of it passes? It has been compared to the 1986 amnesty of President Reagan, because it basically proposes that if you have been in the United States starting January 1, 2021, and you've been here and you're on a path of doing good, which would mean 5 years of paying your taxes, you would get your work card, and after the 5 years pass, you would get a permanent resident card. And then after that, in 3 years, if you spoke a little bit of English, nominal English, then you could become a citizen. Now, there's certain things you have to remember, that it's an 8-year path to get this citizenship. So during that time period, you cannot be a security issue to the United States, and you cannot be convicted of a felony or 3 misdemeanors or something that is going to prohibit you from being admitted to becoming a permanent resident. So, for example, the law that exists today, if we commit certain crimes, then we would not be eligible for naturalization. And also, if we commit certain crimes, we are deemed inadmissible, so we would not be able to get our green card. We would not be able to get legal. There's certain things that, would prohibit us. There are waivers available, but that's a whole other process. We're not going to get into those. We'll see when the law passes. The waivers that are mentioned in the new bill are similar to the waivers that we have existing in today's laws. And they're not that easy to get, and it draws out your process as well. So this is something that we have to wait and see. We should not be counting on this. We should always talk to an immigration lawyer. I think it's important. It's worth the one consultation to find out what is your process and how will you be able to one day get legal? Or if you're planning on staying in the United States, you should be making a plan for yourself. You should definitely be filing your income tax, because every single law that will pass, you will need your income tax. And there is a warning. I'd like to tell you that when you file your income tax, you cannot be filing something that is unbelievable, like $10,000. It's impossible to live on $10,000 a year. I mean, unless you were a student, and then you'd be under your parents' taxes. So you can go to the immigration website or Homeland Security, and you can Google the poverty guidelines for a certain number of members in your family. So if there's 2 members in your family, let's say it would be $23,000 adjusted gross income. If you're 3, it would be more. If you're 4, it would be more. So you can go and look and see, even if you don't have a green card yet, but you one day want to have a green card or you want to be a citizen, you always should go and check that out. Okay, I guess Anna could talk about the rest here.
Sure. So the American Promise Act is something that's going to kind of give a path to people that are here under TPS. TPS stands for Temporary Protected Status. It's not all countries. Portugal is not one of the countries. There's some countries in Africa and some countries in South America that are part of this. So, it's another option for people. You may know somebody that has TPS or that may be eligible for TPS from one of the countries. So that's what the American Promise Act is. We are not really sure what's going to happen with that. And then the DREAM Act is a pathway to citizenship, not only for DACA. DACA, they're looking to streamline that process, but they also included a pathway for people that came here before they turned 18 years old, that don't have any criminal history, that have a high school diploma or GED certificate. So, we're looking at really expanding who may be eligible, just not DACA kids. For DACA, Cynthia talked about the requirements. It's a very strict list of requirements. You had to have been here in 2007. With the DREAM Act, it looks like they're going to try to broaden that to really include any child that came here prior to turning 18 years old, and that's not a risk to the country. I think we might be ready for any questions. Angela, did you get any questions?
Looking on Facebook and Zoom, one of the issues that comes up often in our community when it comes to immigration, at least in the last 10, 20 years, are folks that have come over as children and for whatever reason never became citizens, and then somehow, they, I'll give a story example. They went on vacation to Portugal or to Europe or somewhere, and on the way back into the country, it was flagged to immigration that when they were 18, they broke into a car and were arrested. And so because of that, they are then deported back to Portugal. Oftentimes it's the Azores, the stories that we have heard. And so now you have somebody that has essentially never lived in the Azores, doesn't really have a network there or any contacts, is now living there and has to, kind of find their way. And so we get contacted by the family asking what the options are. So I don't know if you guys can, if is there a specific path for something like that, or, what are the options for the family at that point?
Okay, I guess I could take this one, Angela.
Okay.
You said they came as kids, but they're not USA citizens, so they're permanent residents, I would guess, right?
I don't know for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's two things you can be in America. You can either be a green card holder, which means you're a permanent resident, and you can live in the United States forever as a green card holder. It's not required that you become an American citizen.
Okay.
You become an American citizen so you can vote and do other things, but it's not required. And also you become an American citizen because a lot of people, when they return to Portugal, if they're elderly, they want to retire there. If they don't become an American citizen, they'll take 30% out of their pension if it's going overseas. They used to, okay. So it seems to me that perhaps this is someone who was a permanent resident and they had a crime. And when they came back, they were inadmissible because when they left the country, okay, they immediately instigated when they returned, Customs and Border will look at their green card number and there will be a hit that says this person had a crime. So if it's one of the crimes that makes them inadmissible, okay, breaking into a car or something like that, it depends. If he was 18, usually that's a juvenile thing, and they wouldn't be sent back for that unless they were charged as an adult, unless there were other things involved, they had a weapon. So yeah, basically, there is a waiver. There's a waiver for someone to come back. Now they have to, of course, have a qualifying relative, which would be a parent or a spouse. And there's there's different types of waivers. So it would be worth it for the family to contact an immigration attorney with all the particulars and copies of their record, copies of every single thing that happened, certified copies, police reports, probation records, anything like that happened at that time. So then whoever's looking at it, whatever immigration attorney is looking at it, can evaluate and see, do they qualify for a waiver or not? The waiver's filed in the United States, and then if it's granted, then they'll allow them to come back.
And just to add on to that, if they were involved in some criminal act and it was expunged, that does not matter for immigration. You still have to, even if the records were expunged and you were told that you can tell people that you have no criminal record, that's not true for immigration. You have to release all the information, even if something was expunged.
Great point, Anna.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, the situation is usually, the person is already in their 30s or 40s and the crime was committed when they were younger. So, that's where the kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was an issue comes in, right?
There is one thing we always try to tell people, if you've had any sort of arrest or a crime, before you renew your green card, it's valid 10 years, you should get all copies of your records and see an immigration attorney because the laws change every week. So what was a crime or something that would make you inadmissible in the past may be changed now. During the past 4 years, a lot of the laws and the cases that came down, all the legislation was very strict. So what would have been a problem, what would have not been a problem 15 years ago, may be a problem 5 years ago and now. So we always say, if you've ever had an arrest or anything of that nature and you're not a citizen yet, you should definitely see an immigration attorney to find out what are going to be the risks when you travel. Usually when I get Portuguese people, I have a lot of Portuguese people that they know that they don't want to travel until they talk to you. It does happen, like you said here, but especially since the person might have been very young and now they're in their 30s, but they should always, if they've had any sort of criminal record, they should get a copy of their record and speak to an immigration attorney.
And one thing you can do, immigration looks at your good moral character, even if it's something that is you're going to have to file a waiver. You're going to want to show, what have you done? For example, if you had a DUI, did you take some alcohol classes? What have you done in order to, better yourself? What have you done to contribute to your community? Are you involved in church? Are you involved in, like a Big Brother type program and Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts? What are you doing? What are you doing to give back to your community? How are you a productive member of society? Because that's something that your attorney can use in their argument, on your behalf.
Okay, great. We do have a question from Facebook that is asking just kind of the general path to citizenship. It says, if you are a legal immigrant, I'm guessing either they have a green card or another legal status, and you want to get citizenship, what would be the next step? Sort of covered that in the beginning, but if you could review that again.
Sure, absolutely. So if you have been a green card holder for 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. If you have no criminal record, if you've never voted, if there's nothing, that you've done, then it should be a quite simple, straightforward application. You apply for citizenship, you wait until they schedule your interview, and then you go take a test. Cynthia discussed who gets the easier version of the test, but if you're not one of those categories, you get a booklet of 100 questions to study from. At the interview, they'll ask you 10 questions. You have to get at least 6 correct. If you get the first 6 correct, they won't ask you the other 4. You have to write a sentence in English that they will tell you out loud, and then they'll give you a sentence that you have to read in English. So that's pretty much the process of applying for citizenship. If you do have a crime, if you have something in your record, taxes, you owe taxes and you don't have a payment plan with the IRS, if there's something going on, you definitely need to speak to an attorney, and you definitely need help to make sure that there's no issues and you don't flag yourself with immigration. If you got your green card through marriage and you're still married to that person and you've had your green card for 3 years, then you're eligible to apply in 3 years. Otherwise, you have to wait for 5 years to apply.
There is one thing I just thought of now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're applying for citizenship, they've been strict lately with, say you got legal through a work contract through your boss years ago. They're going to want to make sure that you worked for your sponsor after you got the green card, because that's the law. Now, knowing I used to do 90% labor work for Portuguese people, sometimes they would work for their boss 4 or 5 years, and then they got the green card, and then that was it. They felt they're free and clear. But when you go to become a citizen, they can actually deny you citizenship if you don't show, or if you didn't work for your sponsor, even 2-3 weeks after you got that green card. That's vital. Now, we are in the Third Circuit, Anna as well, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. So in our federal circuit, they cannot take away your green card, but they could not make you a citizen. They could say, we're not giving you naturalization if they find that out, because what they're saying is the whole basis of you getting your green card was not true because you didn't go work for the boss after like you were supposed to. So you got to be careful with that. So I always ask, if I'm getting somebody for citizenship, I always say, how did you get your green card? If you got it through work, did you work for your sponsor after the green card? Usually they don't reach the point of asking for your income tax, but they could, but a lot of times they don't. And not all officers will ask this. It's hit or miss, but we're just trying to give you the warning.
It's a great point, because I always thought that you were obligated to work for that employer because they were your sponsor for a certain amount of time, like 3 years or something like that.
Well,
is that not the case?
No, Angela, the thing is, that might have been non-immigrant if you're on an H visa, but once you get the green card, according to most state laws, labor laws will not allow you to be forced to work for an employer that you do not want to work for. That's against our state labor laws. So you can't say you have to work for me for a year or 2 years. I mean, you might have an employment contract that could be broken. That's a different story. If you work for the government or a federal contract, or if you work for a firm, they might have an employment contract with you. And that's, if you break it, there's penalties. But with immigration, as long as you show that you worked a short amount of time, any amount of time after you got the green card, you're okay. Most of them work the whole time before, because that's what, and then they do work. A lot of them do work after. I mean, I know some people, some clients of mine still with the same boss for 15 years.
And one more point to make, if you're thinking of applying for citizenship and you're a male and you lived in the United States at any time before you turn 26 years old, you have to register for Selective Service. If you're not sure if you're registered or not, you can go online to verify. They just need your social security number, and you'll be able to, it takes a couple seconds to see if you're registered or not. If you are not registered, you must register. And the website is just sss.gov. So you can just go on, verify your registration, and you can go on to register. It just takes a couple minutes, but it's law that anyone in the United States, any male in the United States under 26 years old, whether they're here illegally, undocumented, legally, they have to register with the Selective Service.
That doesn't mean that some people get a little confused. Doesn't mean that you're going to go to war for the United States and you're going to join the military, but it means that it is a federal requirement to register. But there's no draft in the U.S., so you won't have to go. I mean, if they made you go and there was some religious purpose you couldn't go, you'd have to be a cook in the kitchen or do something else.
Got it.
Great point, Anna, about the Selective Service. Yes.
So what about somebody that wants to come and work in childcare, perhaps as a nanny or at a hair salon, in one of those types of services? What are the options there? And I ask because we do get some people responding or contacting us saying that that's their area of profession, but they would like to come to the United States. So what would be the options for those folks? Okay,
so if a person has experience in childcare or babysitting or a nanny, that type of thing, there's different programs. I mean, they can come in as an au pair where they would go to college and they have the child care as well. They would have to have a sponsor in the US. Usually the family in the US would register for an au pair. And then they would get a person to come to their home that they're required to pay give them a car and pay their college fees and a certain amount of money. And they watch the children and live in, and that works out well for them. You can't really choose your au pair though. Now, also, if you know a person who wants to be a nanny and you can sponsor them, they can come over temporarily. They have to go through a non-immigrant work visa, which just, I think it was 2 days ago, already ended for 2021, which starts in October. So people would file last year, and then they've already grabbed all those visas for people who are going to start in October. And there's a process where you file for the person. They have to show they're qualified, give an employment letter. You file an application with the Department of Labor. Department of Labor has to approve it. You put an ad in the paper, make sure you're not taking away a job from a foreigner or a person who's legally able to work here. And you have to, of course, pay the prevailing wage, which is a higher wage that sometimes people are not happy about, but that's the way it is. So you can still come. The temporary workers can come, and they're usually 1 year, and they can extend for another year. But they're really hard to get because there's a lot of competition because we're locked in with the number of visas. That's another thing with the Biden plan. I don't know if it will go through, but it's going to allow us to use up visas that weren't used during the calendar year. So every year, it's a fiscal year is October of every year for immigration. So in October of every year, that's when they get new numbers for all these visas. For the work visas, the temporary visas, they all come up in October. And then everybody starts applying. And then once they're taken, that's it. So it is possible, but it is a harder process. And the person that wants to come has to really have been qualified. So, usually you'll have to have an employment letter proof. In Portugal, you would have worked, if you were a nanny or a childcare worker, you would you would, or a domestic worker, you would pay your contributions to Casa do Povo. It's their social security for the domestics. So they're going to look to see, do you have your deductions in a caixa and, you know, as childcare or at Casa do Povo? Did you make your deductions? Was it really true that you worked? So, you know, they're going to look into all these different things. So you want to make sure it's accurate because you don't want to strike on your record, you know, for future. So it's a lot harder. Basically, in the past, they could come and stay, find a sponsor, and then eventually they would just file their papers and they would get legal. But that's not around, not since April 2001.
Okay. We don't have any other questions at this time, but I think this has been really informative. I know I've learned a few things that I didn't know before. And so hopefully those who are watching now and that who will watch the recording will be smarter or be more knowledgeable about the immigration process. So was there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap it up?
I'm happy to answer any questions via email as well. My email is on the slide. I am fluent in Portuguese, so you can email me in Portuguese. We can speak in Portuguese, whatever is easier for you.
Yeah,
that's great.
You can send me any questions as well.
Okay, great.
All right.
Well, thank you both. This was excellent. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, so thank you so much. And yeah, like they said, if you have questions, you can email them directly, or you can email palcus@palcus.org, and happy to help. And with that,
thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Have a great day. All righty. Bye-bye.